The community hall had always been a simple place. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't big, and it definitely wasn't the kind of place where people expected something extraordinary to happen. But that evening it was filled with energy. The hall had been decorated with warm lights, and volunteers were rushing around to prepare for a small charity event that the town held every year. People came for the food, the laughter, and a bit of music played by local performers. Nobody imagined that a moment would come that they would talk about for weeks. Among the volunteers was a quiet woman who blended into the background so easily that most people didn't even notice her. She had tied her hair in a simple bun, wore plain clothes, and moved gently around the hall as she arranged chairs and helped place small flower vases on the tables. She wasn't loud, she wasn't chatty, and she wasn't the type of person anyone expected to go near the stage. To everyone, she was just the helpful lady who worked at the hall and always smiled politely when someone thanked her. The event's organizer was already tired and stressed. One of the main musicians had canceled only an hour before the event started. The program suddenly had a big empty space in the middle, and he had no idea how to fill it. He walked around the hall, scratching his head, muttering to himself about schedules and timing. While the quiet woman placed a stack of napkins on a table, the organizer approached her. He didn't look confident, more like someone asking for a favor he thought she would refuse. "Do you, by any chance, know how to play a little bit of piano?" he asked softly, almost embarrassed. She looked at him with surprise. "Just a little," she replied, giving a shy smile. "But it's been many years." The organizer didn't need perfection. He just needed someone to play something simple to keep the program flowing. A basic tune, something that would fill the silence. So he quickly nodded and said, "Just a small piece, nothing too much." "It'll help us a lot?" A few people nearby heard the conversation and smiled among themselves. They didn't mean any harm, but they clearly didn't expect anything special. One of them even joked under his breath, "Well, at least it'll be cute." Another one chuckled and said, "It's just background music, nothing serious." The quiet woman heard them, but she didn't react. She simply gave a small nod to the organizer and walked toward the stage with calm steps. The piano sat in the corner of the hall, looking like it hadn't been used in a long time. It was slightly dusty, a little out of tune, and definitely not the kind of piano a skilled performer would choose. She placed her hand gently on the side of it, as if greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. People continued setting up their food plates and talking to each other, not paying attention to her. To them, she was just filling a gap, nothing more. In fact, some people kept chatting loudly, expecting that whatever she was going to play would be something very basic, like a few slow notes or a beginner's tune, but as she sat down, something changed. A small shift. A tiny silence. Not because anyone expected anything, but because of the way she positioned herself. She didn't sit like someone trying something for fun. She sat like someone who had done this thousands of times before. Her back straightened. Her hands rested softly on her lap for a moment. Her eyes closed as if she was remembering something buried deep inside. Then she lifted her hands and placed her fingers gently on the keys. No one noticed. People were still talking, laughing, moving around. Someone poured juice loudly into a glass. A child dropped a spoon. The organizer was flipping through his event paper, trying to look calm, but she didn't rush. She didn't start playing immediately. She breathed in slowly, then exhaled. It was the kind of breath someone takes before doing something that matters to them more than anyone in the room will ever know. And then it happened. The first note. Clear, pure, deep. It wasn't loud, but it carried across the room like a warm breeze. The sound was so clean and emotional that the people closest to the stage froze. The organizer looked up instantly, confusion written across his face. A woman holding a plate paused mid-step, her eyes widening. Even the child who had dropped the spoon stopped to look. The second note came. Then the third, and then a soft ribbon of melody began to flow from her fingertips, wrapping around the room with gentle strength. It was nothing like anyone expected. It wasn't a simple tune. It wasn't something a beginner would play. It wasn't the kind of melody one plays after years of not touching a piano. It sounded like a memory, like something full of emotion, the kind that makes people quiet without knowing why. Slowly, the chatter faded. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned toward the stage, one by one, drawn by a feeling they couldn't quite explain. Phones that were lifted for funny recording moments suddenly lowered, as if people were too stunned to press the button. Her fingers didn't rush. They moved with soft confidence, pressing each key with purpose. Her expression stayed calm, but there was something in her face, something that suggested she wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story without saying a single word. The melody grew slightly stronger, each note blending smoothly with the next. There was control, grace, and a level of expression that only someone who had lived with music for years could produce. Her hands moved effortlessly, crossing over each other, gliding across the keys in a way that looked almost unreal to the people watching. The organizer, who had asked for just a simple tune, stood completely still. His face slowly shifted from confusion to amazement. A group of teenagers near the back whispered, "Is she actually a real pianist?" Another person whispered, "Where did she learn to play like that?" Nobody knew, because nobody had ever asked her anything beyond how many chairs needed arranging or where the extra napkins were kept. But now the entire room only saw her. Not as a helper, not as a volunteer, but as someone who held a kind of beauty in her hands that they hadn't expected to witness that night. The melody continued to rise and fall gently, like waves touching the shore. Some people felt a strange warmth in their chest. Others felt a small ache, as if the music reminded them of something they once loved or lost. Music has a way of finding places inside people that words can't reach, and her playing did exactly that. Minutes passed, though nobody felt time moving. Her fingers moved faster now, dancing lightly, creating a sound that felt alive. And yet she didn't show off. There was no exaggerated movement, no attempt to impress. Everything she played came from a place of honesty. What shocked people most was not her speed or her technique, it was the emotion. Every note carried feeling. Every pause had meaning. She played like someone who had been waiting for years to let this part of herself breathe again, and suddenly, the hall, a place filled with noise just minutes ago, became so silent that the sound of her fingertips brushing the keys felt almost loud. If someone had dropped a pin, everyone would have heard it. The organizer looked around, seeing faces filled with surprise, admiration, awe. It was a kind of silence that only appears when people are watching something rare, something they know they won't forget. Then she reached a part of the melody that was deeper, richer, almost heartbreaking. Her hands slowed just a little, expressing something fragile, something gentle, something she never spoke about out loud. A few people felt tears forming, not because the music was sad, but because it felt real, like it came from a piece of her life that she had never shown. When she lifted her hand slightly for a brief pause, nobody even breathed. And when she continued, the room felt like it was floating. She was no longer just the quiet woman in simple clothes. She was a pianist, a real one, and everyone who had watched her walk to the stage with low expectations now felt their hearts beating faster, as if witnessing a moment they were lucky to see. The final notes of the piece slowly softened, fading into the stillness of the hall. She let her hands rest gently on the keys as the last sound dissolved into silence, but she didn't look up yet. She kept her eyes down, breathing softly, as if letting the music settle inside her again. The audience waited, breath held, stunned. In that moment, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind. Something unbelievable had just happened, and this was only the beginning. When the last note faded into the air, the hall remained completely silent. It wasn't the awkward kind of silence that happens when people don't know how to react. It was the kind that appears when something so unexpected, so powerful, has just taken place that everyone needs a moment to understand what they saw. The quiet woman lifted her hands slowly from the piano keys. She didn't rush. She simply rested them on her lap and finally looked up. She looked almost unsure, as if she wasn't sure whether she had done something wrong or right. Her eyes searched the room softly, expecting small smiles or maybe polite claps, but instead, every single person was staring at her with disbelief. The organizer, who had asked her for a simple tune just to fill time, stood frozen near the front row. His face showed a mix of shock, respect, and something close to guilt for ever assuming she would just tap out a few easy notes. Then suddenly, almost like someone had pressed a button, the entire hall broke into applause. It started slow, like people were still processing what happened. But within seconds, it grew into a loud, thunderous sound. People stood from their chairs. Some clapped with both hands raised. Others let out soft gasps between their applause. A few even wiped tears from the corners of their eyes. The woman's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected any of this. She thought she had only played something simple from memory, something that reminded her of the years when music was the center of her world. She didn't imagine it would touch people this deeply. She stood up slowly from the piano bench. And as she did, a woman from the crowd called out, "How did you learn to play like that?" Her voice wasn't demanding, it was filled with genuine wonder. The quiet woman took a breath, then spoke softly. "I learned when I was young," she said. "Music was very important to me. But life changed, and I had to stop." People leaned forward, wanting to hear more. She looked around the hall almost shyly, then added, "I still played at home sometimes. When I felt like I missed my old self." Those words touched everyone in a different way. Some nodded as if they understood that feeling holding onto a part of yourself quietly, even when life moves in another direction. The organizer approached the stage slowly, still stunned. "That wasn't just playing," he said gently. "That was something else." He didn't have the right words, and honestly, nobody else did either. Some kids ran closer to the piano, their eyes shining with curiosity. One of them asked, "Can you teach me how to play like that?" His voice was innocent and bright, cutting through the emotional air around them. The woman smiled at him, a warm, real smile that felt like sunlight after a long, cloudy day. "Playing like that takes a lot of practice," she said softly. "But yes, anyone can learn if they love it." People around nodded, still amazed. A local music teacher, who had been sitting in the audience, stepped forward. He was known in town for teaching children and adults, but even he had never played with the kind of emotion this woman had shown. He introduced himself politely and then said, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden." She lowered her eyes, a bit overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. Most days she worked quietly, kept to herself, and never thought anyone would care about her music. The teacher continued, "If you ever want to play at events or even teach, I think many people here would love to learn from you." Several people nodded immediately. A few even whispered to each other, "I wish she had performed earlier," or "If she played at a concert, I would definitely go." The woman looked around, taking in the reactions. For years, she had kept her music inside her home, playing only when she missed the life she once dreamed of. She never expected that her playing would move people this way, she finally said, in her quiet but steady voice. "I didn't think anyone would want to listen." She looked down at her hands. "I thought it was something that belonged to my past." A man in the crowd replied, "No, it belongs to right now." His tone was warm, and others murmured in agreement. The organizer gently touched her shoulder and said, "Please, would you consider performing again?" "Not tonight. Tonight you've already given us something unforgettable. But maybe in the future?" She looked at him, then at the piano, then at the people who were still standing, still smiling, still clapping slowly as if they didn't want the moment to end. Her eyes softened. "I think, yes," she said. "I would like that." The applause returned, lighter this time, but filled with affection. As people began to return to their seats, the atmosphere in the hall felt different from before. The warm lights seemed brighter. The conversation sounded more excited. Children imitated piano-playing motions with their fingers, pretending they were her. Adults whispered about how talent can hide in the most unexpected places. The quiet woman stepped away from the piano and walked toward the back of the hall. But wherever she walked, people stopped her not to overwhelm her, but to thank her. Some thanked her for the performance, others said it reminded them of their own dreams, and some told her she had inspired them to start something they once gave up. She didn't know how to respond to all of it. So she smiled shyly and nodded, accepting their kind words with humility. After a few minutes, she found a corner to sit for a moment. Her hands rested on her lap, still feeling the warmth of the keys. She closed her eyes, letting everything sink in slowly. Her heart felt full, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a calm, peaceful way. She thought back to the days when she practiced for hours, dreaming of one day playing on a stage. Those dreams faded when life took her in a different direction. Work, responsibilities, and everyday problems pushed music to the side. And she accepted it because people often do. But deep inside, she never let go completely. Late at night, when the world was quiet, she played softly in her small room, letting the music comfort her. And now, after all those quiet years, she had played in front of others again. Not because she planned it, but because life surprised her. And what surprised her more was how the audience reacted, how they saw her. Really saw her, not just as someone who helped arrange chairs or swept the hall, but as someone with a gift. The event continued with other performances. They were good, entertaining, lighthearted, but everyone knew the highlight of the night had already happened. People kept whispering about her performance. Even the performers themselves said they felt honored to share the stage with her. Later, when the event finally ended and people began to leave, several stayed behind just to say goodbye to her. Some said, "Please play again next time." Others said, "Your music made me feel something I hadn't felt in years." The organizer approached her one last time as she was putting away the extra chairs. "You know," he said gently, "I asked you for a simple song, but you gave us something truly special." She looked down, modest as always. "I didn't plan it," she said. "I just played what I remembered." "Maybe," he replied softly, "but what you remembered was extraordinary." She looked at the piano once more before leaving the hall. It wasn't a perfect instrument. It had scratches, dust, and keys that didn't always sound right. But to her, it felt alive because it had given her a moment she didn't know she needed. As she walked toward the door, the music teacher from earlier stopped her again. "If you ever want to teach," he said gently, "my school would welcome you. No pressure, just think about it." She nodded. She didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep, but she did feel a small spark inside, a spark she thought had died long ago. Outside the hall, the air was cool and calm. The stars were faint above her, and the street was quiet. She walked slowly, feeling lighter than she had in years. Her steps were soft, but her heart felt steady. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt heard, and she felt once again like a musician. As she reached the end of the street, she thought to herself, maybe this wasn't the end of a forgotten dream. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, something she never expected but deeply needed. That night, the people who had been in the hall went home with full hearts, telling their families about the woman who played like a world-class pianist, even though she walked on stage like someone unnoticed. And the quiet woman walked home with a soft smile, knowing that a single moment, a single song, had changed everything for her, not because she wanted fame, not because she needed praise, but because she finally let her music be heard again, and the world listened.